For 60 years, there's been this disease growing inside the biggest man-made structure in Africa. It's this slow chemical sickness that's making 12 million tons of concrete swell up, expand, and basically choke off the very parts that are supposed to keep it working. I'm not being dramatic here. It's an actual chemical reaction. And while this concrete cancer was eating the Kariba Dam from the inside, the water it lets out was digging a huge hole right under its foundation. A hole so deep, it could have made the whole 128-meter wall just fall backward. Now, you might have seen videos online this year saying millions of people only have hours to get out. They're using old info to tell a scary story. And look, they're not wrong that there's danger, but they're missing the actual truth. The real story, the one unfolding right now in June 2026, isn't about a dam that's about to break. It's about a secret $250 million international effort to stop it. And there's this amazing announcement that just came out, proving they might have actually pulled it off. Before we get into the engineering stuff, I want you to tell me in the comments, what do you think is scarier? A disease making a structure swell from the inside, or a giant hole eating it from underneath? Your answer is actually going to be super important in a second. All right, let's dig in. You know, most of our viewers get so sucked into these stories that they just forget to subscribe. If you like this kind of deep dive, it would really help us out if you hit that subscribe button right now. It's truly the best way to let YouTube know these stories matter, and it means you won't miss our next urgent briefing. Please, don't be one of those viewers who forgets. To really get what's going on at Kariba, you first have to ignore the water. Forget about the 181 cubic kilometers of pressure in Lake Kariba. It's the biggest man-made lake on Earth, by volume. But that wasn't the main problem. The first threat wasn't some natural force, it was a chemical problem. The dam was built back in the 1950s, a real marvel for its time. But the aggregate, which is the crushed rock mixed into the cement, had a hidden flaw. There was a type of silica in it that over decades reacts with the alkali in the cement paste. This process is called Alkali-Aggregate reaction, or AAR. Engineers just call it concrete cancer. It's this swelling that you can't reverse. A really slow expansion that creates massive internal pressure, year after year, decade after decade. The dam is literally growing. Its concrete body is getting warped. And that warping started to squeeze the 6 most important parts of the whole structure. The sluice gates, these 6 steel gates, each weighing hundreds of tons, are the only way the dam can breathe. When there's a big flood, operators open them to let off pressure to help manage the huge amount of water flowing into the reservoir.
And basically,
but the AAR swelling was slowly closing off the gate slots.
I'm not being dramatic.
The concrete
here.
was expanding, twisting the precise channels the gates were supposed to slide through. By the early 2010s, just opening them became a struggle. It was a dangerous, unpredictable fight against the dam's own messed up body. Imagine trying to open the safety valve on a pressure cooker, but the metal around it has bent, jamming the valve shut. That's what the Zambezi River Authority, the group that runs the dam for 2 countries, was dealing with.
And look, they're not wrong that
they were losing control,
but they're missing
a really bad once-in-a-thousand-year flood could hit, and they wouldn't be able to open the gates fast enough, or maybe at all. The water would just pour over the top of the dam, an uncontrolled rush that the structure was never ever built to handle. That alone could have caused a total disaster. A dam that couldn't even control its own pressure was basically on borrowed time.
To tell me in the comments,
one big rainy season away from everything falling apart.
Making a structure swell
so that was the internal sickness.
Or a giant hole.
Then there was the external wound.
Your answer
for
is
over 60 years, every time the operators successfully opened those sluice gates, they were accidentally making the second problem worse. The water that shoots out of Kariba doesn't just spread out into an open valley.
It would really help us out.
It slams into the narrow Kariba Gorge. The force is incredible. A torrent hitting the solid basalt rock right below the dam with intense, constant power. The original designers in 1956 knew this would cause some erosion.
To really get what's going on,
they called the area the plunge pool and thought it would carve out a stable dip and then stop. They were wrong. Really wrong. Instead of evening out, the erosion sped up. A swirling, powerful vortex, trapped by the gorge's narrow walls, started eating its way backward, right toward the dam's foundations, toward the concrete toe that holds up the entire 128-meter arch. By 2014,
had a hidden flaw.
When the news first started making noise about this, that plunge pool was 80 meters deep. That's over 260 feet.
Is called Alkali-Aggregate
a chasm carved into solid rock, deep enough to swallow a 25-story building, completely hidden under the dark water of the Zambezi River. The danger wasn't just water pressure pushing the dam over anymore. The dam could actually fall backward, its
dam is
foundations
literally
collapsing
growing.
into the
Its
very
concrete
hole its
body is
own
getting
safety
warped.
releases had created.
And that warping started to squeeze
The official
the six
statement
most
from the
important
Zambezi
parts of the
River
whole
Authority
structure.
confirmed
The sluice
everyone's
gates,
worst
these
fears.
6 steel gates.
If that erosion
each
hit the
weighing hundreds of
foundation,
tons,
the structural
are the only way
integrity
the
of the
dam
whole
can
dam
breathe.
would become,
When there's a big
and this
flood,
is their exact
operators
word,
open them to let off
indeterminate.
pressure to help
In
manage the
engineering,
huge amount of water flowing
indeterminate
into
means
the
you've hit
reservoir.
the absolute
But
bottom
the
of what
AAR
you know.
swelling was slowly
It doesn't
closing
mean
off
a
the
bit
gate
risky.
slots.
It means the
concrete
failure
was
would be so
expanding,
complicated,
twisting the precise
happen
channels
so
the gates
fast,
were supposed to
and be
slide
so
through.
unpredictable
By
that
the
no
early
computer model could
2010s,
track it.
just
You wouldn't
opening
know
them
when it was
became a
going to
struggle.
collapse.
It was
The dam
a
would become a total wild
unpredictable
card.
fight against the dam's own.
So you've
messed
got
up
these
body.
two things happening at once.
Imagine trying to open the
intertwined,
safety valve on
a dam
pressure
swelling
cooker,
from the inside,
but the metal around
threatening
it
to
has
choke
bent,
its own safety gates,
jamming the valve shut,
and avoid growing
That's
from
what
the
Zambezi
outside,
River
threatening to
Authority, the group
undercut
that
its
runs
very
the dam
base.
for 2 countries.
The
was
world had
dealing
a
with.
choice.
They were
Either
losing
watch it
control.
happen,
A
or try
really
one of the
bad
most daring and
1-in-1,000
risky
year flood
engineering
could
repairs
hit,
ever
and they
imagined.
wouldn't be able to open the gates.
The sheer
fast
size
enough,
of this
or maybe
repair
at
is
all.
mind-boggling.
The water would just
Let me know
pour
in the
over top
comments
of the
if you've
dam,
ever seen an engineering project
uncontrolled
on this
rush
level before.
that the structure was
I read all
never,
your
ever built
responses.
to handle.
Back in
That alone
2014,
could have caused a
a
total
bunch of
disaster.
powerful organizations,
A dam that couldn't
the
even
World
control
Bank,
its own
the
pressure
African
was
Development
basically
Bank,
on borrowed
the
time.
European Union,
One big
and the
rainy
Swedish
season
government
away from everything
did
falling
something
apart.
pretty amazing. They didn't
So
just
that was
form
the
another
internal
committee.
sickness.
They didn't
Then there was
commission
the
another
external
report.
wound.
They
For
put
over 60 years, every
$294.2
time the
million
operators
on the table
successfully
to fund the
opened those
Kariba
sluice
Dam
gates,
Rehabilitation
they
Project,
were accidentally
or
making the
KDRP.
second problem worse.
The plan was twofold.
The water that shoots
First,
out of Kariba
fix those 6
doesn't just
stuck
spread out
spillway
into an
gates
open
so the
valley.
dam could breathe again.
It slams
Second,
into the narrow Kariba
and way
gorge.
scarier,
The
was to
force
stop
is
the plunge
incredible.
pool erosion.
A torrent hitting the solid
You can't just
basalt
fill an
rock
80-meter
right below
deep
the
hole
dam
when a
with
river is
intense,
constantly
constant
flowing
power.
into it.
The original
The
designers
engineering
in
solution was
1956
incredibly
knew this would
bold.
cause some
They had to
erosion.
build a temporary
They called the
dam
area the
downstream
plunge pool,
called a coffer
and thought
dam
it would carve out a
to
stable
cut off the
dip and
plunge
stop.
pool from the rest of the
They were
Zambezi
wrong.
River.
Really wrong.
Then they had to pump the
Instead of
entire
evening out,
80-meter deep
the
crater
erosion
dry.
sped up.
Millions
A
and
swirling,
millions of
powerful
gallons of water,
vortex,
all
trapped by
lifted
the
out to
gorge's
show the
narrow
bare,
walls,
shattered
started
bedrock
eating
at
its
the bottom
way
of the
backward.
gorge.
Right
All
toward
of
the
this work
dam's
would happen
foundation,
right at the base of a
toward the concrete toe that
128-meter
holds up
wall,
the entire
holding back the biggest man-made
128-meter
lake on
arch.
Earth.
By
A lake with
2014.
181 cubic
When the news
kilometers
first
of
started
water.
making noise about
A
this,
dam that was,
that plunge
at
pool
that
was
exact
80
moment,
meters deep.
suffering from concrete
That's over
cancer.
260 feet.
The idea wasn't just to
chasm
fill the
carved
hole.
into solid
That
rock,
would only be a
deep enough
temporary
to
fix.
swallow a 25-story
They had to reshape it.
Completely
Using
hidden under the
controlled
dark water
blasting,
of the
engineers
Zambezi
would
River.
carve away tons of
The danger
basalt to
wasn't
make the
just
pool
water
wider.
pressure pushing the dam.
They
over
were
anymore.
intentionally making it
The
bigger,
dam could actually
creating a
fall
series of
backward.
stepped
Its
terraces.
foundations collapsing.
The
into
goal
the
was
very
to change
hole
the
its own
physics of
safety
how the water
releases had
flowed.
created.
A wider terraced
official
pool would
statement
let the
from the
energy from the
Zambezi
spilling
River
water
Authority
spread out over a
confirmed
larger
everyone's
area,
worst fears.
rolling and churning
If that
harmlessly
erosion hit the
instead of
foundation,
focusing
the
into a
structural
single
integrity of the whole
foundation-destroying
dam would
vortex.
become,
They
and
had to
this is
blast
their
away
exact
rock
word,
to save the dam.
indeterminate.
They had to
In
risk creating
engineering,
vibrations at the bottom of a
indeterminate
compromised
means you've hit the
structure just to
absolute
prevent its
bottom
ultimate
of what you
collapse.
know. It
Phase
doesn't
1,
mean a
fixing
bit
the
risky.
spillways,
It means
started
the
in
failure
May
would be so
2019.
complicated,
Engineers
happen so
actually
fast,
had to cut
and be
away
so
parts of the
unpredictable
swollen
that
concrete
no
to free the
computer model
gates,
could track it.
creating new space for
You
them to
wouldn't know
work.
when it was going to collapse.
It was delicate,
The dam would become a
intense
total
surgery
wild
on a
card.
massive scale.
So you've
but
got
the work
these
in the
two
plunge
things happening
pool,
at once.
that's where the real drama
Intertwined.
was.
A dam
Once the
swelling
coffer
from the
dam was
inside,
built and the pool
threatening
was
to
pumped
choke its
dry,
own safety gates.
teams went down into
And
that
avoid
deep
growing
pit,
from the outside,
working right in the
threatening to
shadow of the
undercut
dam
its
wall.
very base.
They started the painstaking
world had a
process
choice.
of drilling and blasting.
Either watch it happen,
completely
or
reshaping
try
the
one of the
riverbed
most
itself.
daring and risky engineering.
And this is where what you might
repairs
have heard
ever imagined.
online is wrong.
The sheer size of
The
this
clickbait
repair is
videos, the
mind-boggling.
screaming headlines from
Let me
May
know
and
in the
June
comments if you've ever
2026,
seen an engineering
they all
project
mentioned the
on this level
2014
before.
warnings.
I read
that
all your
3 years to
responses.
collapse panic.
Back in
They
2014,
talk about
a
3.5
bunch
million
of
people
powerful
being at risk
organizations,
like a tsunami
the
is
World
coming
Bank,
tomorrow.
the African
They're a
Development
decade
Bank,
out of date.
the European Union,
because on May
and the
7th,
Swedish
2026, the
did
chief
something pretty
executive of the
amazing.
Zambezi
They
River
didn't just
Authority,
form another
an
committee.
engineer named
They didn't
Munirazi
commission another
Munodawafa,
report.
put out a press
They put
release that should have been front page
$294.2
news
million
worldwide,
on the table
but it
to fund
wasn't.
the Kariba
He
Dam
announced that the
rehabilitation
huge
project,
$294.2 million
The plan was
rehabilitation project
First,
was 94%
six
finished.
stuck
The
spillway
plunge pool
gates so the dam
excavation,
could breathe
which
again.
was the biggest single threat
Second,
to the dam's
and
foundation,
way scarier,
was officially
was to stop
complete in
the plunge
December
pool
2023. The risk
can't
of the
just drill
dam
an
falling
80-meter
backward
deep
into
hole
that
when a
hole
river is
has
constantly
been,
flowing
for all
into it.
practical purposes,
The engineering
taken care
solution
of.
was incredibly bold.
The spillway gates are
They had
being
to build a
finalized,
temporary dam
and the whole
downstream
project is on
called a
track to
coffer
wrap
dam
up in the last
to
quarter
cut
of
off the plunge
2026.
pool from the rest of the Zambezi River.
If you're just realizing how
Then,
huge this
they
was,
had to pump the
and
entire
the quiet
80-meter
victory
deep
that's been
crater
achieved
dry.
here, please take
Millions
a second
and millions
hit
of
subscribe.
gallons of water,
We reveal
all
the
lifted
stories
out to show
behind the
bare,
world's most
shattered
important
bedrock
infrastructure.
at the bottom of the gorge.
And subscribing is how you
All of
support
this
that
work
mission.
would happen right at the base
If you
of
have
a
family or friends who need to
128-meter
understand
wall,
these hidden
holding back
risks
the
that
biggest
shape our
man-made
world,
lake on Earth.
please share this video
A
with
lake
them
with
and hit the like
181
button.
cubic kilometers of
It
water.
helps way more than you
A
think.
dam that was,
Now back
at
to
that
what was
exact
avoided.
moment, suffering
This
from
story
concrete
isn't
cancer.
about an impending disaster.
The idea wasn't
It's
just to
about
fill
one of the
hole.
closest calls
That
in
would only
modern
be a
engineering
temporary
history.
fix. They had
They
to
avoided a
reshape it.
catastrophe so
Using
massive
controlled
it's hard to
blasting,
even wrap your head
engineers
around.
would carve away tons
But to
of
truly
basalt
get what
to
they
make the pool
saved,
wider.
you have to look at
They
what
were
would have happened if
intentionally
they
making
failed,
it bigger,
if that plunge
creating
pool
a series
erosion
of
had won
stepped
out,
terraces.
if the fix had come too
The goal
late.
was to change
the
the
engineering
physics of how the
models,
water flowed.
the ones that first
A
got
wider
that
terraced pool would let the
$294 million
energy from the
intervention
spilling water
moving,
spread out over a
are
larger
truly
area,
terrifying.
rolling and
A failure at
churning
Kariba
harmlessly
wouldn't be just
instead of
one
focusing
thing
into
happening.
a single foundation.
It's a chain
destroying
reaction.
vortex.
One
They had to
domino
blast
falling
away
that sets
rock
off
to save
another
the dam.
and another across
They
four
had to
different
risk
countries.
creating vibrations at the
If the
bottom
dam
of a
had
compromised
collapsed,
structure
the
just
initial
to
breach
prevent
would
its
unleash a
ultimate
torrent
collapse.
of water into the
Phase
Zambezi
1,
Gorge.
fixing the spillway,
But it's the sheer amount of
started in
water
May
that's
2019.
incomprehensible.
Engineers actually
181
had to
cubic
cut away
kilometers
parts
of
the
water,
swollen concrete
the entire
to free the
contents
gates,
of the world's largest
creating new
man-made
space for them to
reservoir,
work.
all released at once.
It was delicate,
The water wouldn't
intense
just flow;
surgery on a
it would
massive
explode.
scale. But
a
the work
tsunami
in the
moving
plunge
down a
pool,
river valley.
That's where the real drama
The first
was.
communities downstream
Once the
would have
coffer dam
minutes.
was built and the pool
The
was
town of
pumped dry,
Kariba in
teams
Zimbabwe,
went down into
with
that
its
deep pit,
29,000
working
people,
right in the
is
shadow
right
of
below the
dam
dam.
wall.
It would be
started the
gone.
painstaking
There's
process
no
of drilling
evacuation
and
plan that
blasting,
could get people out of the way of a
completely
wall of
reshaping the
water
riverbed
moving that
itself.
fast.
And
Within
this is
8
where what you
hours,
might have heard
that wave
online
would
is
hit the
wrong.
Mozambique border.
The clickbait
but it
videos,
wouldn't
the
just
screaming
keep going.
headlines from May and June
It would head for another,
2026,
even
they all
bigger
mentioned
target.
the 2014 warning.
Downstream in
That 3 years
Mozambique's
to
Tate
collapse
province
panic.
sits the
They
Cahora
talk about
Bassa Dam.
3.5 million people
That's the
being at
second
risk
largest
like a tsunami is
hydroelectric
coming
facility in
tomorrow.
Africa.
They're a decade
A beast
out
in
of
its own right.
Because on May
But its
7th,
spillways are built to
2026,
handle a
the
maximum
chief
flood of
executive
around
the Zambezi
13,000
River
cubic
Authority,
meters per
an
second.
engineer named Munyarazi
The initial blast from a
Mundawafa,
Kariba
put
failure
out a
is modeled
press
to be
release that
nearly
should have
6
been
times that.
front-page news worldwide.
Cahora
But it
Bassa
wasn't.
wouldn't
He
just be
announced that the
damaged.
huge
It would be completely destroyed.
$294.2 million
Overrun and
rehabilitation
breached by a
project
force it was never designed to
94%
even
finished.
imagine.
The plunge pool
Kay
excavation,
Darborn,
which
a
was the
researcher
biggest
who
single
helped write
threat
the
to
main
dam's
2015
foundation,
report on a
was
Kariba
officially
failure,
complete in December
said it
2023.
simply. She said the
The
flow
risk
from
of the dam
Kariba
falling
would cause
backward into
Cahora
that
Bassa
hole
to
has
be
been,
breached
for
and the
all
cycle of
practical
damage will
purposes,
continue
taken care
downstream.
of.
A
The
cascade
spillway
failure.
gates are being finalized.
Now you'd have
and
the
whole
combined
project
water
is
from
on
two of
track
the
to
world's
wrap up
biggest
in the last
reservoirs,
quarter of 2026.
Kariba and Cahora Bassa,
If you're just realizing
roaring
how
through
huge this
Mozambique
was,
toward the Indian
and the
Ocean.
quiet victory that's been achieved
This is
here,
the scenario
please
that
take
would
a
put
second and hit
3.5 million
subscribe.
people in
We
Zambia,
reveal the stories
Zimbabwe,
behind the world's
Mozambique,
most
and
important
Malawi
infrastructure.
directly in the flood's path.
And subscribing is how you
Homes,
support that mission.
farms, hospital schools.
If you have family or friends
an
who need to
8-hour window
understand
from
these
that
hidden
first
risks
crack at
that shape our
Kariba
world,
to a
please
wave
share this
overwhelming
video
the
with
border
them
hundreds
and
of
hit the like
kilometers
button.
away.
It helps
But the
way more than you
destruction
think.
wouldn't stop with the
Now
water.
back to what was avoided.
The economic fallout
This
would
story
cripple the
isn't about
entire
an
southern
impending
African
disaster.
region.
It's about
Together,
one of the
those two
closest
dams
calls
provide
in modern
40% of
engineering
the
history.
total hydroelectric
They
power for a
avoided a
dozen
catastrophe
nations.
so massive it's hard
In
to
South
even wrap
Africa
your head
alone,
around.
losing the
But to
transmission
truly get what
lines
they
from
saved,
Cahora Bassa
you have to
would
look at what
instantly
would have
knock
happened if they
1,500
failed, if that
megawatts
plunge
off
pool
their
erosion
already
had won
struggling
out.
grid,
If the fix
plunging
had
the
come too late.
continent's most
The
industrialized
engineering
economy
models,
into permanent
the ones
darkness.
that first got
Zambia's
that
copper mines would
$294
shut
million
down.
intervention
Zimbabwe's farming
are
regions would
truly
be wiped
terrifying.
out.
A
Two
failure
whole
at
nations,
Kariba wouldn't be just
Zimbabwe
one
and
thing happening.
Zambia, would lose their
It's a
main
chain
source of
reaction.
power,
One
water, and
domino
economic
falling that
life
sets off another
in a single day.
and another across 4
The
different
report from the
countries.
Institute of Risk
If the
Management
dam
South
had
Africa
collapsed,
wasn't
the
just
initial breach would
predicting a
unleash
natural
torrent
disaster.
of water into the Zambezi
It was
Gorge.
predicting a
But it's the sheer
multinational
amount of
failed
water
state
that's
event.
incomprehensible.
This is what was at
181
stake.
cubic kilometers of water.
This is what was going
The
on
entire
beneath the
contents of
surface
the world's
while
largest
the world
man-made
was looking
reservoir,
somewhere else.
all released at
The
once.
danger wasn't just
The water wouldn't
theoretical.
just flow.
It has a
It would
terrifying
explode.
history.
A tsunami
Twice
moving
before,
down a river
dams
valley.
built with the exact
The
same
first
design as
communities
Kariba,
downstream would
a
have
double
minutes.
curvature concrete arch,
The town of Kariba
have
in
failed in
Zimbabwe,
the exact
with
same
its
way.
29,000
In 1959,
people, is right
the
below the
Malpasset
dam.
Dam in
It
France
would be
collapsed,
gone.
killing
There's
423
no evacuation
people.
plan that could get
The
people out of
reason?
the way of a wall of
An
water
unforeseen
moving that
weakness
fast.
in the foundation rock
Within
of one
8
side.
hours, that wave
In
would hit the
1928,
Mozambique
the
border.
St. Francis
But it
Dam in
wouldn't just
California
keep going.
failed catastrophically,
It would head for
killing
another,
over 400.
even bigger target.
That failure was identical.
Downstream in Mozambique's
Problems with the
Tate province
foundation.
sits the
Both were
Cahora
considered
Bassa Dam.
engineering marvels.
That's the second
Both
largest
were declared
hydroelectric
safe
facility
right
in
up until
Africa.
the moment they weren't.
A beast in its own right.
Both were smaller,
But
held held back
spillways
far
are
less
built
water
to
than
handle a
Kariba
maximum flood
and
of
still
around
caused complete
13,000
devastation.
cubic meters per
Kariba
second.
was headed down the same
initial
path,
blast from a Kariba
dealing with the
failure
same
is
basic
modeled to be
problem
nearly 6
of
times
unpredictable
that.
geology made
Cahora
worse by the
Bassa
plunge pool
wouldn't
and the
just be
concrete
damaged.
cancer.
It would be
was a triple
completely
threat
destroyed.
that no other dam had ever
Overrun
faced
and
on this
breached by
scale.
a force it was
I
never
know,
designed
I
to
know.
even
I'm bringing
imagine.
it up again.
Kay Darborn,
It feels like telling
a
you to eat
researcher
your
who helped
vegetables.
write the main
But
2015
hitting that
report on
subscribe
the
button
Kariba
is
failure
genuinely the only
said
way
it
channels
simply.
that do this kind of
She
deep
said the flow
research
from
can
Kariba
keep
would
going.
cause Cahora
It's what keeps
Bassa
us digging.
to be breached, and the cycle
So
of
if you're
damage
getting
will
something
continue
out of this
downstream.
and haven't
A
yet,
cascade
please
failure.
do. My producer
Now you
thanks
have the combined water
The
from two of
algorithm,
the world's biggest
well, the
reservoirs,
algorithm appreciates
Kariba
it.
and Cahora
Okay, back to the
Bassa,
final act.
roaring through
the story of
Mozambique toward
Kariba
the
in
Indian Ocean.
2026 isn't
This
about
is
a
the scenario
ticking
that
time
would put
bomb.
3.5
It's the
million
story of the
people
bomb
in
being
Zambia,
taken apart
Zimbabwe,
quietly,
Mozambique, and
carefully,
Malawi directly
and
in
at
the
a
flood's
huge
path.
cost.
Homes,
Just moments before
farms,
the timer went
hospital
off.
schools.
The heroes
An
here
8-hour
aren't
window from that
politicians
first
giving
crack at
speeches.
Kariba to a
They're
wave
engineers like
overwhelming the border
Munyaradzi
hundreds of kilometers
Munodawafa,
away.
working for the ZRA.
But the destruction wouldn't stop.
They're the
with
anonymous
water.
crews who went down
The
into that
economic
80-meter
fallout would
pit,
cripple the entire
working in one of the
Southern
most
African
dangerous
region.
construction environments
Together,
you can
those
imagine.
two dams provide
They're the
40%
international
of the
funders
total
who truly
hydroelectric
looked at the
power
data
for a dozen
and actually
nations.
did something, putting
In
up the
South
money
Africa
before the
alone,
collapse,
losing
not
the
after.
transmission lines from Cahora
The
Bassa
fact that the
would
KDRP is
instantly knock
94% complete
1,500
is a
megawatts
massive
off their
achievement
already
that's gone
struggling
almost
grid,
totally unnoticed.
plunging the continent's most
The story of
industrialized
fear is
economy
stronger.
into permanent
It gets
darkness.
more clicks than the
Zambia's
story of a
copper mines would
complex,
shut down.
successful solution.
Zimbabwe's farming
Those
regions would be
sensational
wiped
videos
out.
are easier to make
Two
than a
whole
story
nations,
about basalt
Zimbabwe
geology,
and Zambia,
coffer dam
would lose
logistics,
their main
and the
source of
chemical
power,
composition of
water, and
60-year-old
economic
concrete.
life in a
But the
single
truth
day.
is actually more
The
interesting.
report from
Southern
the
Africa
Institute of
came
Risk
to the brink of a
Management, South
humanitarian and
Africa, wasn't
economic
just predicting
disaster
a natural
that would have been
disaster.
bigger than any recent
It was
catastrophe.
predicting a multinational
And a team of engineers
failed
with
state
global
event.
support pulled it back from the edge.
This is what was at stake.
One last time.
This is what
Before
was
we
going
wrap
on
this
beneath
up,
the surface
if this story
while the
changed
world
how
was
you
looking
think about the
somewhere
hidden
else.
world of critical
The
infrastructure,
danger wasn't just theoretical.
subscribing would mean
It
everything.
has a terrifying
It helps
history.
us fund the research to
Twice
really
before,
dive into the next
dams
one.
built with the exact
The work
same design
isn't quite
as
done
Kariba,
yet.
a double
Phase
curvature
2 of the
concrete
spillway
arch,
refurbishment
have
is at
failed in the
70%.
exact same way.
The final
In
systems will be up
1959,
and running by the end of
Malpasset Dam in
2026.
France collapsed, killing
But the main threat,
423
the
people.
dagger of the plunge
The
pool
reason?
aimed at the dam's
An
foundation,
unforeseen weakness
has been
in the
removed.
foundation rock of
The
one
dam
side.
can breathe again now.
In
its gates
1928,
moving
the
freely.
St. Francis Dam in
The structure is
California
stable.
failed
The
catastrophically,
3.5 million
killing
people
over 400.
downstream aren't living
That
with an
failure
8-hour
was
evacuation
identical.
notice anymore.
Problems with the
They're
foundation.
living downstream from
Both
one of
were
the
considered
greatest engineering
engineering
saves of the
marvels.
21st century.
Both were declared safe.
The question isn't
right
whether
up
the
until
dam will
moment
break
they weren't.
anymore. The
Both
real
were
question
smaller,
is why
held
the
back
story of
far
its
less water
rescue
than
was never
Kariba,
really told.
and still caused complete
While fear went
devastation.
crazy online,
Kariba was
the
headed
solution
down the
was
same
just a
path,
quiet press
dealing
release.
with the same basic
The
problem.
roar of water from a
Unpredictable
potential
geology
collapse would have been
made
heard
worse by
around the
plunge
world.
pool and the
But the
concrete
silence
cancer.
surrounding its
It
prevention
was a
is maybe
triple
just
threat
as
that
profound.
no other dam had ever faced
In
on
the
this
end,
scale.
the clock didn't
I
win.
know. I'm
The
bringing
patient,
it up again.
methodical,
It feels like
and
telling
often
you to eat your
unseen work of
vegetables,
engineering
but
did.
hitting that subscribe
And for
button is
3.5
genuinely
million
the only way
people,
channels that
that's
do
the
this
only
kind of
story
deep
that truly
research
matters.
can keep going. It's what keeps us digging. So if you're getting something out of this and haven't yet, please do. My producer thanks you. The algorithm appreciates it. Okay, back to the final act. The story of Kariba in 2026 isn't about a ticking time bomb. It's the story of the bomb being taken apart quietly, carefully, and at a huge cost, just moments before the timer went off. The heroes here aren't politicians giving speeches. They're engineers like Munyaradzi Munodawafa, working for the ZRA. They're the anonymous crews who went down into that 80-meter pit, working in one of the most dangerous construction environments you can imagine. They're the international funders who truly looked at the data and actually did something, putting up the money before the collapse, not after. The fact that the KDRP is 94% complete is a massive achievement that's gone almost totally unnoticed. The story of fear is stronger. It gets more clicks than the story of a complex, successful solution. Those sensational videos are easier to make than a story about basalt geology, coffer dam logistics, and the chemical composition of 60-year-old concrete. But the truth is actually more interesting. Southern Africa came to the brink of a humanitarian and economic disaster that would have been bigger than any recent catastrophe, and a team of engineers with global support pulled it back from the edge. One last time. Before we wrap this up, if this story changed how you think about the hidden world of critical infrastructure, subscribing would mean everything. It helps us fund the research to really dive into the next one. The work isn't quite done yet. Phase 2 of the spillway refurbishment is at 70%. The final systems will be up and running by the end of 2026. But the main threat, the dagger of the plunge pool aimed at the dam's foundation, has been removed. The dam can breathe again now, its gates moving freely. The structure is stable. The 3.5 million people downstream aren't living with an 8-hour evacuation notice anymore. They're living downstream from one of the greatest engineering saves of the 21st century. The question isn't whether the dam will break anymore. The real question is why the story of its rescue was never really told. While fear went crazy online, the solution was just a quiet press release. The roar of water from a potential collapse would have been heard around the world. But the silence surrounding its prevention is maybe just as profound. In the end, the clock didn't win. The patient, methodical, and often unseen work of engineering did. And for 3.5 million people, that's the only story that truly matters.